Welcome to episode 40 of the Camerosity Podcast, the world's #1 open source film photography podcast. My name is Mike Ekman, and Happy New Year to all you out there. This is our first of many episodes for 2023, and as promised, we're starting off the new year continuing our Pentax discussion we started in episode 28. As always, from Gainesville, Florida, the man who shoots alligators with a 50mm lens is Mr. Anthony Rue. Do the bird photographers with their 500mm camo lenses give you the stink eye when you do that?
Absolutely. You know, first of all, they just can't understand why I don't have a 1200mm Canon camouflaged DSLR, because that's really all they seem to want to shoot. And so anything else, I think, threatens them.
From Yellow Springs, Ohio, a small town, which the Guinness Book of World Records recently certified as having the most vintage camera sales of anywhere in the world, is Mr. Paul Reibel. How does it feel to be a record breaker, Paul?
Well, I'm not going to rest on my laurels anytime soon, since I've still got about 543 pieces in the basement.
And finally, from Sydney, Australia, the city that brought us Hugh Jackman and NXS, is our own superstar, Theo Panagopoulos. Hey, Theo, how many autographs per day do you have to sign from your fans each time you leave the house?
I think, let me do the tallies here. Zero. Unfortunately, I'm not quite there yet.
Has Noel ever asked you for your autograph?
No, they do actually ask me about the podcast sometimes when I do meet up with some of the local photographers, but unfortunately, no one's really asking for autographs yet. So
nobody's shown up with a Sharpie and a K1000 and asked for your autograph on the.
No. I think that they're worried about one thing in particular. If I sign their K1000, is the devaluing of their resale value once I sign it.
Okay, well, it's been a great holiday season. I hope all you guys had a wonderful Christmas, Festivus, whatever, New Year's. I know I did. I got a fancy new mic stand here for the podcast, so maybe the microphone will stay out of my face while I'm talking. But it looks like we got a bunch of people in the waiting room, so I'm going to start letting them in.
Ed's joining us.
All right, we got some returning guests. Bob Rotoloni's here. Mark Faulkner, Larry Effler. Hey, Larry. Andrew Smith is back. Hey, Andrew.
How you doing?
I see a couple first. Oh, Mario's here. Sorry, Mario. Hey, Mario.
How's it going?
All right. We got a couple first-time callers. Ed Gabe, welcome to the show, Ed.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
You want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Ed Gabe. I'm from Lexington, Kentucky. I'm a professional photographer for builders and contractors and commercial real estate by trade, but my passion is still film photography, and that goes back to the 1980s for me.
Awesome.
And believe it or not, Ed and I have a connection in that he was also a cave diver involved with Global Underwater Explorers when I was active in the diving community.
Yeah, that's right.
Super cool.
Anthony and I, not together.
Repping my Halcyon shirt.
Nice. I've got a few of those in storage. Yeah, we're a couple of the weirdos that go underwater into caves.
Cool. All right, there is Nato. Hey, Nato, how you doing?
Doing all right. How are you guys doing?
You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. So I'm Nate Ostroushko. I'm from the Twin Cities area. Kind of a camera nerd. Worked at a camera shop for a while. Picked up an old Leica. I'm actually the guy that emailed you about the Pentax LTM lens.
Oh, okay, cool.
Figured I'd join up and talk.
We talked after the first Pentax episode. The question came up actually twice about whether Asahi had ever made a rangefinder, and we all concluded they hadn't. But you pointed out the contemporary screw mount, the L39 Pentax SMC lens. He's got one. Awesome. Yep. Yeah, we all quickly looked on eBay once we talked about it, and then we all just never mind. So, how long have you had that lens?
So I've actually only had mine about a year.
Okay.
And actually the prices in that amount of time have just skyrocketed.
Yeah, a lot of lenses have.
Which camera do you have it on?
I've got an M6 Classic.
The only other person I know that has one is our buddy Von Cabbage, and he put it on a CLE.
Oh, sure. Yep.
Because it made sense. He had a CL with a 40 on it, and so he didn't have a lens for the CLE, and so that matched up pretty well for him.
Now, do you know when, I think we kind of assumed it was early 2000s. Is that about when that lens was first released?
Yeah, it was year 2000 specifically.
2000. Okay.
Yep.
Well, that's cool. All right. But yeah, so everybody else, welcome back. For those of you who've been on the show before, like I said earlier, we started the Pentax episode right before the holidays. and we got really sidetracked with 127. And they had some of the time. A couple people joked about took us forever to actually get on topic, but that's how it goes. But I feel like we covered, for those of you maybe listening who haven't had a chance to listen to that episode its entirety, we pretty much covered the early years of Asahi, how they got started, the Asahi Flex, the original M40, and then eventually M42. No, I'm sorry, it was M37. And then the M42 screw mounts, the original, I talked about the Pentax K, the original one, which had the slow speed dial. We talked about the H and S series, eventually the Spotmatics, and we were just about to get into the K mounts, and we kind of realized that was a good ending point because nobody wants to listen to a 3-hour podcast. So I felt like we could kind of start from the K mount forward. You know, Asahi obviously had a long history of making cameras well into the 80s and 90s. They had a couple medium formats. They had the 110 cameras. They had quite a few point and shoots. I have a couple here that we'll talk about, but does anybody want to get started? Maybe one of our new people.
Are you sure you don't want to go down a 616 116 rabbit hole for 45 minutes before?
Yeah, sure. No, 828. We'll talk about 828. Kodak Bantam film or Rapid film. We could talk about that.
There's another 127 coming up in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, that's right, January 27th. So we could find the Asahi 127 camera, maybe some kind of S pocket Pentax or something. Because of the way that the month lays out, we'll have 3 episodes in January. So maybe we could talk about 127 again another time. But we actually have a couple things planned for the next 2, but I'll talk about that at the end of the show. So I don't know, Phil, who wants to start? Maybe I know the K mounts were very, very successful. They sort of reinvigorated Asahi's kind of stance because they were tried and true throughout the 60s and 70s, but they sort of came back into the limelight again.
It seemed like the ES2 was the end of the line for the screw mounts.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So what was the first K mount?
KM, K2X, K2.
They released all 3 of them pretty close together.
Yep.
I think a lot of people assume the K1000 was first, but that's not true. That came 76 maybe?
Sound
no, right?
Later than that, because the KM, K2, KX was 77.
Okay.
Or they might have been 76 also. I came back into the photo industry in 77.
Was the K1000 a big seller then? Like, I mean, was it as popular then as it is now?
It actually didn't come out until I don't have the exact date, but it was at least a year or 2 later. Because the KM and KX were only out for like 2 years. So the K1000 would have come out probably in about 79.
Okay.
But those cameras were really, really good cameras. They were extremely reliable. And the market that they were going after were the Mamiya 1000 DTLs, the Ricoh Single X TLS, the other thread mount cameras that were just at that time also switching over to Pentax K.
Okay.
Well, by 1984, my college newspaper had stacks of them.
Of what?
The K1000s?
Of K1000s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You could just, they were just like books on a library shelf,
Well, I started selling them to police departments in about 1980 with the Vivitar 50 millimeter macro lens. And that was the police kit. I mean, the camera with either a Panagore, an Elicar, Vivitar 50 macro lens, and a Metz 45 flash unit in a Pelican case or some other Halliburton type case. And that was a police kit for evidence collection.
Standard CSI.
It was what they were trained on. I mean, the crime labs all tried to standardize because policemen are I don't want to say they're stupid, but taking pictures is not really what they're there for.
Sure.
So you've got to make it as simple for them as you can. So that became the crime lab kit. We call it the crime lab kit.
The same with college students.
Yeah, that's true. And those cameras are relatively bulletproof, so they were really pretty hard to break.
I mean, historically, just looking at the ones that are still around today, I mean, other than maybe the match, needle not working, the meter being dead, mechanically, they almost always work. In fact, I don't even know that I've come across a K1000 that didn't function. It may not be perfect timing, but they usually work.
Yeah, and they were mostly metal up until the the very end. I think that when they went to the Chinese,
yeah, they were made in Hong Kong.
Base plate, the base plate went to plastic. I think at that point.
Yeah,
but most of them were metal, and they were. It was really unusual to see one with a dead meter. I mean, they just really were very well made, and the components seemed to be good.
Hey, Paul, when you say about the components and the meter, not really finding one that would have a dead meter, does that apply, or in your mind, does that apply just to the K1000 or also to the KM, KX, and K2?
Well, you didn't see as many of those, so your sample isn't quite as many in the sample.
Okay.
But on the cameras of that type, like the Nickermats and other mechanical cameras with built-in light meters and match needle type cameras, the problem became that you would get a buildup on the wipers, on the coil, and that caused a needle to jump. So when you see a needle jumping like that, it generally means that there's just some kind of debris or something in the metering system. The K1000s never seemed to have that problem. Olympus also had the problem, but Pentax for some reason just did not seem to have that jumping needle syndrome that you get into with other match needle cameras.
If I understand this a little bit, because I'm not very knowledgeable in this area of Pentax, what was the actual target market for the K1000 and the MX? And what was Pentax aiming for at the time? Not now, obviously it became a student type camera and so on. But at the time, what was Pentax actually, how was their line actually configured?
There's like a gap that we haven't covered. And that is between the KX and the K2, there was the MX, which as I understand it, if you've ever used an MX, it was very much an analog for OM1 and an FM2. So it was smaller, lighter, full manual camera. It only used the battery for the light meter. I am absolutely in love with my MX. You put the 42, is it 42 millimeter, 40 millimeter?
40 millimeter right here.
There you go. The 40 millimeter 2.8.
Right, 2.8.
It's a really sweet pancake lens that just turns it into a pocketable camera.
It's become my favorite SLR of all time.
Yeah, it's anybody who's used one or used that combination absolutely will fall in love with it. But that was considered to be like a semi-pro backup camera, from what I understand. And then after that came the ME and the ME Super, which were their aperture priority cameras. So they would have competed with the Canon, with the AE1, perhaps.
That would have been close. The thing that happened was that you had the MX and the ME were out at the same time.
Yeah,
and that was fine. But the MX was a full manual camera, and the ME was aperture priority only. So it was like a Nikon EM. It had no manual control of the shutter speed. The only way you could control the shutter speed was by adjusting the aperture. So that lasted for just a couple of years. And then they came out with the ME Super, which was aperture priority or full manual, but you had to change the shutter speed by using those funky buttons.
I really don't like that camera.
It wasn't a bad camera, but it wasn't.
Yeah,
it was not ergonomic at all. I mean, it was just really a
I actually love that button.
Did you? I
People either love it or hate it. There's nobody goes, eh.
Yeah. But then they jumped the shark after that because they came out with the MG and the MV, which
I've never even heard of those.
Really horrible cameras. One of them had was a full program only, and I believe that was the MV. All it did was give you a yellow light if you didn't have enough light. You could adjust the aperture, but you had no idea what the shutter speed was going to be.
And so the K1000 came after those.
No, the K1000 came out at about the same time. K1000 was actually out at the same time the ME and MX were out.
Oh,
it was just their budget camera. It was still the big body, still the K body, as opposed to the miniature body that the MX. I never saw Pentax say this, but I always considered the M's to be the miniature bodies, they just made them small.
The MX has a motor drive. I don't believe the K1000 does. Does the K1000 have a self timer? I believe it or not, don't have one in front of me.
K1000 does not have a self timer.
Yeah. So, because realistically, if you wanted a mechanical camera with basic metering, the K1000 is just a discount version of the MX. But with the benefit we have today of being able to pick these things up for considerably less than what, inflation adjusted prices, it would have been newer. People talk about the prices of cameras going up, which is true, but it's only true compared to the rock bottom prices of 10 years ago. But realistically, you can still find these things at a bargain compared to what they were like new. And like, I have a K1000 and I'm asking you questions like, does it have a self timer? And the reason I don't know that is I don't ever touch my K1000. I mean, the MX, I have so much love for this camera. This is in many ways, it's like Pentax's version of the OM1, the Olympus OM1.
Absolutely.
And that the body is much smaller than other SLRs of the day. Nikon's, I love the EL2, I love the Nikkor mats, but they're so much bigger. The viewfinder on this thing is so bright.
And it uses batteries you can get now.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, yeah, some of the later Nikkor mats did too, but like I have a K2. I don't know if you can see that, but I mean, the K2 is just monstrous compared to the MX. Yeah. The hard thing for me with the MX is like every time I pick it up, I don't ever want to touch any of my other K-mounts. It's that good.
Mike, does the MX have a depth of field preview?
Mine does not.
Oh, I thought it did.
What throws people off with the with any K-mounts is the lens release button is right where like depth of fields would often be on a lot of a lot of different SLRs, but no, it's got the self timer, it's got a shutter lock, it's got mechanical speeds from 1 to 1,000, hot shoe, FPNX, so it can do both types of flash sync. It's got electrical contacts on the bottom, probably for the motor, obviously the motor drive coupling. But I mean, in terms of just the MX can do absolutely everything the K1000 can, but slightly more, and it's got a smaller body. So for me, that's like, I can stop talking the rest of the show. I've already covered my favorite K-Mount Pentax.
I hate to keep bringing up the education market, but you could go into a university bookstores and they had photo class kits that were a K1000, a 50, that flash that everybody had, and they pushed them out the door like crazy. I mean, it was like you were required to buy them if you didn't, have a camera. So they moved a lot of them that way.
Larry, that was true all the way up to about 2005. The bookstores, college bookstores, would have Nikon FM10s, the K1000s. Right up till the time Pentax discontinued them, they were an educational market camera because they were cheap and lens availability was good for K-mount, and they were just a really cool choice for that particular market.
Well, it intrigues me that the MX is kind of, at least in the popular discussion boards and all, the MX is kind of flown under the radar, because right now it seems like the ME Super is really having its day. I'm seeing a lot of people picking up on the ME Super.
That's the camera was in Stranger Things.
Oh, that's right.
He uses that camera. Jonathan Byers has an ME Super throughout all of season 1. I can't remember if he has the same camera in season 2, but I don't know if that's why, but that could definitely be contributing to it.
Just it intrigues me because, like you say, it's the little button adjustment for the speed just really throws me off, and they haven't been as reliable to me. I think I've been through 3 ME Supers that all seem to be in decent shape when I got them, and they're just not aging as gracefully as the MX is.
I would compare it functionally to like the Nikon EM. I mean, it's got a manual 125. You can set it in manual mode and use the buttons like you guys have both said. But for me, like if I was to shoot this camera, which it's nice, I mean, it's almost identical in size to the MX. It's about the same weight, same lens, same excellent viewfinder. It still has the analog. Wait, no, it does use LEDs. Never mind. On the side, but I would just leave it in auto. Like if I just want to shoot auto, I wouldn't even mess with the buttons on it. Andrew says he likes the buttons, so it's kind of neat, I'd be willing to bet at the time that was pretty like futuristic, to have a push button camera.
They sold a lot of them at Service Merchandise and Steinmart.
I remember Service Merchandise. They had one of those near where I grew up.
I got a question about the switch from the N42 to the K-mount. I just recently purchased a KX, and it's en route to me. I haven't gotten it yet, but I'm really looking forward to using it. But I don't have any lenses, any K-mount lenses. And this is just a body. So I bought an adapter, an M42 to K-mount adapter, because I love my M42 lenses from the Takamars to the Vivitars and all of them. Was there a substantial betterment of the lens quality between the old M42 Takamars to the SMC Takamars of the K-Mount era?
I must say that's the exact same question I was about to ask as well, Mario.
The SMC refers to the coating. I am not an expert on lens coatings, but generally, like when you look at other lines like the Minolta Rockors, the Nippon Kugaku Nikkors, generally the later coatings are seen as superior. You know, they could help marginally improve contrast, slightly better color rendition. But take away the coating, if you're just talking about the glass, I'm going to go with no. I do not think anybody can tell you with proof other than just opinion that a Asahi, Takamar, SMC, and K-Mount is optically better, because we glowed repeatedly in episode 38 about the screw mount Pentax lenses, and they're excellent. So if you're asking optically, I'm going to go with I doubt it.
Well, I will say that the last time that I was on the Classic Lenses podcast, which it's been a few years now, I asked Johnny the same exact question. And his take was that no, there really was no difference in the formula. He just preferred like the form factor on the screw mount lenses because they tended to be a little bit more compact. And then the only thing to keep in mind as you get your new camera is that there were several iterations of the K-Mount. So there's the Pentax M, which are the manual lenses. Then there's the Dash A, which are for the aperture priority, right, Paul? Dash
Yes.
A. And then there were the later autofocus lenses. So curiously, the later cameras can use all the lenses. The earlier cameras can use the first two. So like I was just shooting a Pentax A on my MX and it just worked perfectly fine.
Yeah.
This K1000, the K1000 I have here actually has an A lens on it for some reason. I don't know why, but it made with that lens.
But if you try to take one of the autofocus lenses and put it on one of the manual cameras, no go.
Yeah. My opinion is that the screw mount lenses are far better built than any K-mount lens. I mean, if you just take
build, you mean build quality, right?
Build quality. The build quality is much better. You rarely find a screw mount lens with loose elements. You'll see them a lot of times with dinged filter ring because they are so much heavier that when you gravity check one of the thread mount lenses, you are going to get a dented ring. Whereas with some of the K-mount lenses, they're so lightweight, you can drop them to get away with it.
Build quality, there's more use of plastics in the K-mount lenses. But it's, again, I keep going back to the Nikkors, but it's like the Series E versus the AI lenses. Optically, you're not really going to see a difference, but the Series E lenses use a little bit more plastic, a little bit more light weight saving materials, similar to the K-mount Pentax lenses. So it's plausible that you could get one of these, like Paul said, that's loose. I mean, I could wiggle the aperture ring a little bit. I mean, there's a tiny bit of play in mine. It's certainly nothing that's going to affect performance at all, but I don't think you'll ever see a difference. Where you will, Mario, have a problem with that KX is you'll only be able to do stop down metering.
Okay.
Because the pin that a screw mount lens has to stop it down, the K-mount cameras do not have that. So
you'll have to use the lever on the lens itself because the KX, I don't believe the KX might have had a depth of field preview, but it's got to stop down. It has to stop down meter. There is no linkage. So you've got to stop down. Mario, one big deal though, if you can do it, when you go to find adapters, try like crazy to find the Pentax brand.
I ended up ordering it was an original Pentax adapter.
Okay.
In great condition. So I'm hoping that that's the right one.
Well, if it's
should work fine.
If it's a Pentax brand, it's going to be fine. But there are a lot of aftermarket brands that were private labels, and they were not as precisely made, and they were sometimes extremely hard to get out of the camera.
Oh, okay.
When you take the lens off, you could unscrew the lens, but it would not match. It would not hold to the body. So you'd wind up with the body off the lens off the body, but the adapter would be stuck inside. And they gave you a little tool that came in the little green bag with it. And that tool matched into the slots on the adapter so you could unscrew it.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to using the camera with the adapter because I do love my, the old Takamars. Like all of you said, the build quality is just fantastic. The focus is just so smooth, and the optics are just beautiful. So I'm just hoping that it will all work together.
For your first actual K-mount lens, I would, to the top of that list, definitely look for that 40 millimeter. People are aware of it. The prices of them are going up, so that you're not going to find it for a bargain. But I mean, you could find the 50 f2s all day long. I mean, these things are like from Japan. You can get them in bulk. You could find them attached. If you want to buy one of these lenses, just find another K-mount body. One will probably be attached to it, like an ME.
The 1.4 is nice. The 51
Yeah.
is nice.
The 1.4 is one of the best lenses I think they ever made.
Yeah, it's a really
Really?
nice lens.
That's high praise.
That's a great K-mount lens.
Yeah, the 40, the digital, the full frame guys have really glommed onto that 40, and the prices have tripled in the last 3 years.
But keep in mind, Pentax DSLRs still use the K-mount. So while I don't think the Pentax digital SLRs ever got anywhere close to popular in terms of like, Nikon, Canon, even Sony, but the fact that that lens was interchangeable from back then till now, I think kind of added to the appeal to them.
It looks most amusing on my K1 because it looks like a lens cap on the K1.
It's a pinhole lens.
If someone was buying a K1000 for the first time, say new student and so on, and that came with the 50 f2, I've got the SMC Pentax M here on the K1000. Is that a reasonable lens, or is that going to throw people off?
It's a great lens. Yeah. I mean, if you can get a 51.4 for reasonably cheap, definitely go for it. But if you already have the 50 f2, I don't know that I would spend the money just to get one extra stop.
So I'd be better off just using this, and then if I wanted 1.4, just stick on my M42 version.
Sure.
Okay.
You'll stumble over one.
You'll find them, but there is absolutely nothing to be ashamed of with the 50 f2. I mean, it's a great lens.
I live here in East Tennessee, which is the home of the man's name escapes me, who repairs Pentax.
Eric, is it Eric Henderson?
Yes, thank you, Eric. He lives about 15 miles away from me.
Oh,
and I've taken a few his way, and I actually have had a couple that even he couldn't repair. So he might have a few extra lenses sitting around because I know that I left them behind.
He won't do the LXs anymore, right?
No, he doesn't really like to do the MXs anymore because of his eyesight.
Oh, okay.
Let me sort of backtrack. So if the MX was kind of like a backup professional camera, and then in the future they had the LX, which was their attempt to do like a Nikon, maybe F3, F4.
Yeah. No, the F3.
The 6.7, 6x7 came out in 69. So that was actually before the K1000. So was the 6x7 an attempt? Was it seen as a professional camera? I mean, it's a studio camera. Was it seen as like a legitimate pro camera at the time? Was it a competitor to the Hasselblad or to the other medium format cameras?
It was a very popular wedding camera.
I never saw it as a wedding camera, Larry, because it wasn't a leaf shutter. You got a focal plane shutter, so you're syncing flash at a 30th of a second.
Didn't they have one?
They did have one leaf shutter lens, but it was very clunky to use. The other end of that, the other question there is, it was really, really noisy.
It was loud.
Very loud. Very loud.
To shoot a wedding with it would be.
I have a funny Pentax 6.7 noisy shutter story. A friend of mine shot our wedding, my wife and my wedding. We were still married, and I knew that camera, and I knew that it had a 10-city jam. And when we kissed, I heard it jam. I held on to my wife, and he's in the balcony, so I'm squeezing her, holding this kiss until I hear the shutter clear. I hear an exposure, and then I hear another exposure just in case, so that we'd get that picture. And then we walk down the aisle, and my wife says, "Oh, that's so sweet." I said, "Yeah, Owen's camera jammed." That was the first argument we had as a married couple.
That's funny.
A couple days ago, Bob Rotoloni came over to my house. I've known him for 3.5 years, and he's never been over here before. So we could talk a bit more about that later. But for a brief moment, we were having a competition to see which camera had the loudest shutter. I don't have a Pentax 6.7, but we decided that the Bronica S2 has the loudest shutter of what I have. So does anybody here know if the Pentax is louder than the Bronica, or are they about the same?
Yeah, I think it's louder. It's a larger mirror.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, it's noisy, and it's an instant return mirror. So when it slaps, it really
You
slaps.
can hear it in the back of a big
Here it
bag of
is.
shirts.
Here it is if you want to hear
Yeah.
it.
The gist about the market for the 6x7, it was really commercial photographers.
Yes, it was.
Because they had a good lens selection of wide angles. You got a wide angle, don't you, Theo? Or
Well,
Anthony?
I've got a loaner. A friend from Gainesville has graciously loaned me his 6x7, and I've been shooting it just to get a feel for it. And I've got the 35 millimeter f4.5, which is the fisheye, and I guess that's equivalent of maybe a 15, maybe a little bit more. It's got more curvature to it than my 15 for the Pentax has. For the 35.
It's 180 degrees, I think.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's an awesome lens.
Well, I just discovered as I was getting ready to take it off, I just realized that it has all of the filters built into the lens with a little rotating ring on the front, so you can go from the clear UV filter all the way down to a dark red. So at the beginning of the intro, I was out taking film out of the wash, and I just went and shot just a quick roll of Ilford SFX with the dark red filter just to see how much infrared I could get out of it. It was really cool having that feature, though, because there's no way you're going to get a filter on the front of that lens.
No. But that camera was that was actually the first version of those. I remember when they first came into the US, they did not have, for some reason, they didn't have very good quality control. And there was a lot of light leaks. And I think it was because the back didn't quite latch tight enough. But once they got it done, it was a great camera. I mean, it had a lot of lens capabilities. The metering was good on it. There was just no downside to the camera except for the weight and the noise.
Well, I've been a Nikon user for 55 years, right? But I once had a complete Pentax 6.7 system. I had everything from the fisheye all the way up to the 600 f4, which had a front element on it like this. But anyway, I love that camera. Unfortunately, arthritis destroyed my knees and my back, so I couldn't carry the thing anymore. So I had to eventually get rid of it. But the thing is, I can remember, and I've used Nikkor lenses for all those years, which are smooth lenses. However, the smoothest lenses I've ever used, the smoothest focusing lenses I've ever used were the Pentax 6.7 lenses. They were like butter. They were gorgeous. That's the best thing I think Pentax ever made, was a 6.7 system. The optics were fantastic. They really were.
You're right, Bob. The dampening on those lenses, when you turn them to focus it, you get instant feedback.
Yeah, it's gorgeous.
It's just smooth as can be.
The resolving power on those lenses, I mean, I'm getting really beautiful negatives out of it. But honestly, as a user, it's just as fussy as using the Kodak Metalist.
Well, yeah, of course it is. It's not. I mean, it wasn't made to be an automatic camera. It's a mechanical camera.
Yes,
I'd be interested you've recently been shooting with the RB67 as well, haven't you, Anthony? So the Mamiya. They're probably the two comparisons I'd be interested in, because I've not shot the Pentax 6.7. So how would you sort of compare those two cameras against each other?
Of the two, I much prefer the 6.7. I've never really, and actually it's kind of funny because you say that, because the other camera I had out today, in addition to the 6x7, was my Mamiya 645. And it feels like a brownie box camera compared to the Pentax.
The thing about the Pentax is that you use it just like you would a regular 35 millimeter camera. So it's eye level, but everybody's used to that. It just went natural for me to pick that up and shoot with it. I had no problems at all, except for the weight.
I'll second that. Like RB67 versus the Pentax. The Pentax has something special about it. I mean, the RB has a lot of great things. I do love it, but the Pentax is special. The one thing about the RB, of course, is the rotating back. I do use that. I do appreciate that feature, but the special factor goes to the Pentax by a little bit.
They're just so different. I mean, they're like not. Yes. They're so very different.
The RB seems to me to be more of a studio camera than the 6.7 is. The 6.7, I'm not a studio photographer. I use the 6.7. I used to go all around. Like I say, the weight just got to me. You could shoot all over with that thing. The only thing you couldn't shoot very well was sports.
So it's the mobility that's the big difference, basically, from what I'm understanding there.
You want a padded strap if you're going to take that.
Oh yeah,
6.7 out in the field. I did about 3 miles with it today on a trail through the swamp. Exactly, holding up a padded strap. So I did about 3 miles on a swamp trail today, and my back was feeling it at the end of the.
You gotta get curvature of the spine. You keep that up.
Yeah.
Don't fall in.
Yeah.
While we were talking, we had another person join. I'm seeing Marcy Merrill. Marcy is from Junk Store Cameras. She is the OG film photography blogger. Do I have that right, Marcy?
Thanks. Hey, I just noticed it was on. And so I saw what you were talking about. So I grabbed this Spotmatic just to, there went the lens cap, but just to be appropriate here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So your site, real quick, I don't mean to jump topics here, but how long has Junkster Cameras been up?
25 years.
25 years.
It shows its age, though. It really does.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah. So it's fun to be here.
Well, welcome. Thanks for coming. So I just want to introduce you while you were there.
Mike, wasn't there a Soviet K-Mount camera?
Couple of them. I've been shooting it with mixed results, but the Almaz series of cameras, they had the 101, 102, 103, and 104. The 103 is the only one that was produced in any amount of, I think like 9,000 of them were made, but the other kinds were like barely made it past the prototype stage. But it's an SLR. A lot of people say it's a Soviet version of the Nikon F2. It's certainly heavy. It was designed, I guess, for the professional market. It does have an interchangeable prism or viewfinder, I should say. So you can take, and I'm struggling getting it off, but it does come off. Just trust me on this. You can remove the viewfinder. It uses a K-mount. It's fully mechanical, 1 through 1,000 speed. They did come up with a flash port that goes around the rewind knob, similar to how Nikon did it. It does have a motor drive coupling. I don't know that they ever made a motor drive coupling for it, but it does use the K-mount. So, I mean, you could here's an Almaz 103. I can pull the lens off, and then here's my Takumar 50 f2. I can mount this lens to the Soviet camera. So this one uses the K-mount, and I actually think, and I don't remember when they did this, but eventually the Zenits did switch to the K-mount too at some point.
Was there ever a K-mount Helios?
Maybe.
Where's Vlad when you need him?
Yeah, I don't know. This lens it's branded Lomo. It's a 50-1.8. I don't know if it's a copy of anything else. I mean, it feels heavy. I mean, I just based off of tactile, looking at the lens coating, I did shoot a roll through this already, and optically it was excellent. So this lens that came on the Almaz 103 is certainly good.
There's a Helios 44K-4, which is a K-mount native.
So that would have been on one of the very late Zenits. Eventually, the Zenits did abandon the M42 mount, and they switched to the K-mount too. So yeah, the Almaz series, the later Zenits, and the only other Japanese mount Soviet camera were the Kiev. I think the 19 used the Nikon F mount. So some of the Soviet cameras eventually they wisened up and stopped releasing their own proprietary lens mounts, because a lot of the proprietary Soviet lenses almost never went anywhere. The Start had a lens mount that was unique to itself, and they never made another lens for it. So at some point, maybe in the 80s, I don't know a lot of how easy it was to get stuff in and out of the Soviet Union, but I imagine by the 80s, they were kind of starting to be able to get stuff from Japan. Because I know, like in the 50s and 60s, there was nothing. Like they weren't aware of Japanese cameras at all. There was either the domestic Soviet cameras or the Germans. But I think that probably explains why you started to see the K-mount lenses in the Soviet Union at that time. But it's certainly a nice camera. I mean, there's a lot of third-party other brands that use the K-mounts too. You'll find those lenses, and they're all pretty interchangeable.
I have a question. Why is it that the K-mount became almost generic overnight? In other words, I've never seen a new mount all of a sudden adopted by so many other different brands. Anybody know? Did they license it out that way, or was the mount stolen?
No, I think they licensed it because if you look at it, the way it worked was they came out with it, and then Ricoh was very close behind them.
Right behind them, yeah.
Chinon was very close behind them, and GAF.
Yes.
In this country, there was a GAF that had the thread mount. In Europe, there was the Revell cameras, a Review camera.
Review, yeah.
Photoquell.
Review and several, Photoquell. And there were some others too. At the end, the Alpa had didn't the Alpa have K-mount?
They did.
Vivitar SLRs had K-mount. Vivitar SLRs had the K-mount.
Yes, of course.
Yes.
Yep.
The reason I ask is, Nikon spent a lot of time defending their mount. They wouldn't allow you to use their mount, So I was always surprised how quickly everybody started to use the K-mount.
Well, if you'll remember when Vivitar started making, when they made M42 mount lenses on the box, it didn't say M42, it said universal.
Universal, right.
Yep. So the same thing, it just then the K-mount became the universal mount.
But Pentax would have had to license them to do that, wouldn't they?
I'm not sure they patented the K-mount.
May not have. They may not have.
I don't think they did. Otherwise, why, if they had, it was crazy for them to let other people do it.
I don't know.
Right.
Sometimes being a smaller a piece of a bigger market is handier. Look at VHS rather than data.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can make more money by being a fish in a bigger pond.
As long as we were talking about the sort of the professional side of Pentax, I'm wondering if anybody here on our esteemed panel has an opinion about the Pentax 110 and the 110 Super.
I had one for 6 wonderful months and I loved it.
Look at this. I got a whole stack of them.
Yeah, I bet I've had 10 of them in the last year, but only one Super. I've only had one Super.
I only have one Super also. I only have one Super.
A lot of 110s, auto 110s, and most of them are in the kit with all the lenses. The
attaché case, the aluminum case.
Yep, the whole work.
The whole thing. It's got all the filters, all the filters, all the lenses, everything under the sun.
My uncle, who's an Air Force colonel, got me one at a PX, and I used it and loved it, and then I gave it back to him.
It's a nice little camera. It really is. It's very well made, and it works. It works well.
I was getting on a plane.
You got a winder for it. You got a flash unit for it. You got a bunch of lenses, even a zoom.
Was it the best 110?
Probably.
It was the fastest.
Yeah, I would say so.
I think it's the easiest to handle.
I don't know. I'd fight with you over that. I think that Canon 110 ED
Oh, yeah.
might be the best. I mean, it wasn't as versatile.
It's a rangefinder with an f2 lens, so it's pretty fast.
It's really good, yeah.
But it doesn't have interchangeable lenses, so it's not really fair to compare the two. But that with the Pentax 110 was really a nice camera, and the lenses on the front were excellent lenses. A lot of people today are using them on mirrorless APS.
They don't have a diaphragm. They're the shutter was the aperture.
Right. Mm-hmm. They're all 2.8s, every one of them.
Well, I have to say that the Minox 110 is my favorite so far.
Is it?
Well, you got one that works.
Oh, no, the Minox worked every time. It was the Rolei 110 that I think I tried 6 of them.
Oh, that's right. It was the Rolei that worked,
and did not have a single one that worked. They're all brand new in the box. But the Minox has a rangefinder on it. It's really it's got the barn doors on the front. It's super tiny. It's you don't see them. They're fairly rare. But I also got the best quality out of the Minox. I think I've shot 4 or 5 110s. I'm not up there with Mark, but it's been my favorite so far. But I'm really itching to get my hand on a Pentax 110 because I've never even held one.
Was the Pentax 110 more like an automatic camera, or did it have manual control?
Was aperture?
It was aperture priority, it was aperture priority only.
Okay.
And what's the difference between the regular and the super?
I don't know that. I
can't remember.
I can't either. And I meant to look it up and I forgot.
Should look at mine here and see, but it doesn't say anything on the box about what's different about it. But
didn't one of them come in green?
I had one in maroon. There's also a maroon one. Externally, they look about the same. They might have improved the rapid wind lever. I don't know. It's the same motor and everything, so there's nothing different that way.
Yeah, the Super has a timer with an indicator LED on the front, a shutter lock, and a button for backlight compensation.
Okay, is that what it is? Okay.
Not really deal breakers for any of those things, I wouldn't think.
But it's really a very handy camera to use. And when you get that little winder on it, this thing here, it's actually even easier to use when you have the winder mounted on it. Because this is really kind of small. If you have big hands, you have trouble with this camera.
Yeah, the way they designed that winder, it's got that vertical drop on the front of it, on the bottom, that really makes it a nice handle.
But they are delicate, these winders. I've had 4 of them, only 2 of them work. And I guess this is the Achilles heel of the whole system, is this winder.
The thing I had the problem with that winder was people would leave the batteries in them, and the batteries but also the latch. I'm
just going to say, this latch on the end for the battery, it's very weak. And I've had a couple of them that came to me broken that way.
Same thing was true on the MX winder. Or MX motor, winder, I guess you'd really call it. Anthony brought up the LX. Has anybody ever shot with an LX? Anybody here?
I have. Yeah, it's in many ways does compare favorably to the F3. It's got a lot of the same features. There's a few pieces of technology it has that the M3 doesn't, or the F3 doesn't. One thing that it can do is it can do it's a electromagnetic shutter similar to the F3 in that it's mostly electronically controlled, but it can shoot at slower speeds mechanically, which is opposite of some other cameras where usually you can only shoot the faster speeds mechanically, but you do get a little bit more flexibility in terms of mechanical speeds. Mine was a loaner, so I don't have it in front of me. It does favor comparably, uses the same great lenses, but the one knock against those is that they just haven't held up quite as well. We talked about the F3 before. Its real biggest weakness that have come to light since then is the little LED in the display. But and I don't know the specifics of it. Someone will probably know listening to the show, but the LXs suffer from some internal seals that degrade, and it requires like a complete teardown of the camera to replace. The electronics have started to show their age too. So a lot of times when you get an LX, it'll have questionable operation. If it does work, you might get the jumpy meter, and I don't think anybody will fix them. That we were talking about Eric Henderson, he won't even touch them. I don't know of anybody else who will touch the LXs because they're extremely electronically complicated. Plus, like the F3, it was in production for a very long time. It came out in 80. I want to say they discontinued it in 2001.
Yeah, it was out for a long time. In Dayton, the Dayton newspaper those guys were all customers of mine and friends. And everybody shot Nikon except for one guy who shot an LX. And my favorite LX story was we had a local university that flooded a basement. And so they're down, there's no power in the building, and they're down walking around in the basement in about 3 feet of water, which is okay. That's only like waist deep for him. But there were some planters that were built into the floor, and all the dirt and the mulch had washed out of those planters. He stepped into a 4-foot hole. So he steps into a 4-foot hole, and he's got a camera around his neck, and the Pentax goes underwater, and he gets it up above water. He dries it off, opens it up. The film is completely dry.
One really cool feature of the LX is the exposure counter is directly coupled to the position of the film. So as you advance it, it goes up, but as you rewind it, it goes back down. So in theory, if you were really big on double exposures and you wanted to go back like 2 exposures and shoot an exposure on top of another one, you can actually rewind the film and the exposure counter will go backwards, and it'll tell you exactly where you're on the roll. Believe me, that's nothing I would do, but that is kind of a neat little feature. And I did note, I'm looking at my my review for it. It does have a titanium shutter too, which is kind of like gives it a little bit more props for the pros. But it's nice in terms of size, slightly smaller than the F3, which was pretty impressive considering the F3 was quite a bit smaller than the F2. I think that like you noted, a lot of people who were already Nikon fans probably weren't going to switch, but if you were looking for something new and maybe you were impressed with gadgets and a long list of features, the LX was probably appealing to a lot of people.
Or if you came out of college with all your K-Mount lenses that you bought at the
that's true too.
Store.
They also, on the LX, also had interchangeable finders that were very advanced for what they did. They had a finder base that you could interchange other finders like rotating finders, stovepipes. And since the meter was in the body, you would still have the meter in the camera.
And the prisms had a hot shoe on it, unlike the F3, which required the shoe over the rewind crank. So that was, I think, a first. I might not be right on that, but at least compared to the F3, if you prefer just a typical flash hot shoe, the LX with the interchangeable prisms, you could just attach a flash to the prism without a special adapter.
So it seems like after the LX and after the K1000, Pentax went through a period of kind of like lost in the wasteland of lots of plastic bodied, fully automated SLRs. Were there any of those that were notable? Any of those that are like good values now?
I don't think so. I mean, the cameras really weren't that bad. They were just Me Too's. This is a Pentax A3, which is a program camera that I don't believe, I'd have to look at it. I don't think it has aperture priority or full manual. I think it's strictly an automatic camera. But they were just like Me Too. This one actually has batteries in it. It does give you the shutter speed readout in the body, which is a good thing. But I don't think it gives you any other control.
Didn't they target the amateur market though? Because I mean, everywhere you go, any thrift shop you walk into, you'll invariably see an MZ50 sitting there, lonely someone to pick it up and buy it for about $10. So is that, I mean, did they just go for mass market rather than the more professional customer base?
That would be my guess.
I really think they were lost in that period of time. I don't know where their market was. It had to be the discount houses, because not a lot of pro stores were carrying them. And, they had their first automatic autofocus camera was the SF1, which was really a clunker. I mean, it was very slow to focus.
Yeah. Olympus really struggled with that market too. It was very difficult for some of these Japanese companies to transition to the electronic autofocus era. I mean, obviously, we know Minolta had the Maxim 7000, which they beat the other companies to the market.
I believe that Minolta and Pentax both had the dream of, competing with Canon and Nikon, and Pentax just gave up that dream sooner because Minolta's Maxim made them believe they could.
If you look at the history of the Pentax SLRs, I mean, they never really aimed for the top of the market. The LX was an anomaly. They did, I'm looking it up here because I know my friend Adam has one. Around 2000, 2001, they released an autofocus body called the MZS. The MZS was kind of a half-hearted attempt at making a semi-pro camera. It had a magnesium body, like every electronic feature you could possibly need. It has kind of a funky redesigned top plate, but they didn't sell well. You look at any time these companies really tried to elevate them. There was like a barrier between consumer and professional that was almost impossible to cross over to. Nikon did it. Nippon Kungaku did it. Canon eventually did it. Minolta tried.
They tried to.
And the Minolta X1, XM, whatever they were called, were good cameras. I mean, they had some questionable decisions on them, but
I tried to.
Who did?
Topcon.
Yeah.
Topcon. Right.
But trying to get to that pro market was prohibitive, and I think contributing to that too is, once you sold to a pro photographer, they would usually stay in that system. Like, guys weren't really jumping back and forth between Nikon and Canon. Once you had a system, you stayed with it. So the entrance point into anything higher than consumer was prohibitive. But keep in mind that prior to the late 70s, if you were an amateur photographer, you weren't shooting an SLR, right? And finally, the era of autofocus, auto exposure sort of opened up a whole new segment that really didn't exist before. So companies like Olympus, probably Minolta, definitely Pentax, they said, hey, this is where we want to compete. This is where we could make some money. But as we've seen too, without the history of camera companies, there's only so many different fish that can swim in the same pond. And it had to get to a point where some of these companies had to fail.
People with Nikon and Canon, they shot for the New York Times and National Geographic, but there were a lot of professional photographers working for the Maryville Daily Times and the Dayton. They were shooting Minoltas and Pentaxes and K-1000. So they weren't. It wasn't that no professionals were using this, just that they didn't end up on the covers of prestigious papers and magazines.
Once the photo is made, no one's going to read the Sunday Times like, yep, this was shot with a Nikon. Right. The difference was, which we've spoken about many times before, in the 70s, Olympus tried to get into the pro market. And while their cameras were really well built and they worked really, really well, they just could not handle the true photojournalists, the guys that are going across overseas, shooting wars, going to the desert, going to Antarctica. There's a reason people stuck with the brands that they did, because they did hold up. And, you look at, where the hell is it? I've had two autofocus Pentax cameras. This one's called a PZ1. This one's called a Z1P. They're broken. They don't work.
I've got a ZX50 that came as part of a Jim Dine dental setup. So it had had a really beautiful 105 macro lens, but with the ring flash. But that camera, I mean, it feels like any of the mid 90s, like Canon EOS plastic, wouldn't trust it really in this day and age to do much more than, be a casual take to the beach kind of a camera. Nothing I'd really want to rely upon.
But did the focus in the 90s change a little bit for some of these companies? Because if you look at Pentax and Olympus to and Minolta, they had a huge range of compact cameras that were coming out at the time. You know, the autofocus, the travels, they just sold everywhere. They're a bit of a cash cow in that respect because, you know, everybody was taking cameras suddenly to travel, and they wanted the quick snapshots and the easy, unobtrusive camera. So, I mean, they had a line of SPOs, which, to be fair, I mean, I picked up a few of those and they just work. They work great. I mean, they're not the fastest thing. They're sometimes a little bit noisy, but they do the job quite well. I can imagine selling lots of those would be making lots of money.
I had two of the SBOs. I had the 140V and the 115V. They were fine. You know, I actually just gave them to friends who wanted point and shoots because that's not really my bag. But I did run test rolls through both of them, and you know they performed as well as any other of that generation point and shoot.
The point and shoot cameras were to SLRs what the phone is to a digital SLR.
Sure.
I mean, they basically replaced them because they were so convenient. You know, it was the old thing about, you know, you could stick it in your pocket and go out for the day with your kids.
Yeah.
And you didn't have to haul around your big SLR camera. But the Pentaxes were excellent cameras.
Thinking about the point and shoots of the 90s and 80s and all that, it's not a Pentax, but one of my favorite point and shoots of that era is the Nikon Action Touch waterproof camera. I love the fact that it's a fixed focus length or focal length. Did Pentax ever make any fixed focal length point and shoots?
I've got one right here, actually. It's the PC35. This one's the date version, AF. Mike's got one there. I've actually taken the auto wind off mine because it's a bit noisy. It basically fits on top and basically just winds it on for you. And this nice, quiet little camera. I haven't had any of my film developed yet on it because it's Christmas. My lab's closed and I don't develop my own film. But it operates really nicely. I really like it. It's so small. It's 35mm f2.8. And you can find them at reasonable prices. And one of the things I really like about this is because a lot of people that go into compacts, one of the issues they find is the flash turns on automatically in a lot of them. This one, it doesn't turn on until you tell it that you want to use flash with a lever down the bottom. So that way you're not sort of constantly fighting to turn the flash off.
What was that again?
The PC35 AF.
Cool, thanks.
So and yeah, it seems like a really well-made camera. It's an early autofocus, so it's one of those that sort of points to you and tells you whether you're taking a picture of a person, people, or mountains. I think it's mountains. I can't remember, but it's reasonably made. It works nicely. It's got a self-timer. It's got a backlight button on the top. So if you've got shooting into backlight, you can adjust it by 1.5 stops. And this one's got the date feature on the back too, which goes up to 2019. So you could be living in the past if you like.
I have one too, and you know I'm echoing what Theo says. It's a pretty nice camera. I got excellent images from mine. Mine has the optional motor winder for it, which how it works is it actually there's a gear and it just turns the motor winder knob, automatically. But Theo pointed out it's really loud. It's like every time you fire the shutter as it's grinding away at the camera. So it's certainly not discreet, but it does. With it mounted, it gives you kind of a grip, like a hand grip that the camera without it doesn't have. So I agree. This would be my vote for my favorite fixed lens autofocus Pentax point and shoot.
So they basically jumped into the compact market, you know, both feet I reckon. So when we talk about Pentax going into the pro market, I'm not sure their focus was even there.
Yeah, it's hard to tell, you know. Yeah. I mean, I think they were just looking to make money, right? You know, while you guys were talking, I attempted to find answers to some questions that came up unsuccessfully, which was why the K-Mount initially became kind of a generic mount. I found a couple articles from the early 70s when the K-Mount was released, and I quickly browsed through them while you guys were talking, and there was nothing mentioned at all about them being like a OEM kind of provider. I just think that perhaps Pentax was one of the biggest names in the screw mount SLRs. I mean, they were still very popular, and there were a lot of companies making screw mount lenses. So it stands to reason that when they switched to their own bayonet mount, some of the other companies sort of just followed suit. That would be my best guess. But it from at least what I was able to read while you guys were talking, I did not find anything indicating that Asahi intentionally tried to be, third party. But if you think about it, it actually helped them. The more companies releasing lenses in their mount, in a way, kind of opens up the door to more potential customers. Because if you were, correct me if I'm wrong, Paul, but if you were in a camera store in, let's say, 1984, and you were looking for a good mid-range SLR, and you were considering a Pentax, there might be a Chinon that was slightly cheaper, right? Is that correct?
Ricoh or a Chinon, for sure. Absolutely.
You said in a previous episode that store owners loved Ricohs because they had a huge markup on it, right?
Well, there wasn't a huge markup. They could make anything. The problem with name brand cameras back in that time frame was like Canon, Nikon, Minolta. A dealer had to sell it at actual dealer cost.
That's
because that's what the New York mail order houses sold it for.
Right.
So you would sell it at dealer cost. You would maybe get 5 or 6% on the back end from the manufacturer. You could try to sell a filter, a gadget bag,
a case, ever-ready case.
Yeah, ever-ready case, all that stuff. And the Ricoh then was not in those distribution channels. You would have the opportunity to make a little bit more money on it.
I'm feeling so guilty now for all those cameras that I bought from B&H.
Well, the thing that allowed B&H to be so successful over the years was that they did not have to charge sales tax.
Yeah.
A local dealer would sell the same camera at the same price, but they were 6 to 7% more expensive because of the sales tax. And that was a lot of money back then, in that time frame.
So Marcy, I'm going to call on you here. You showed us your Spotmatic you had there too. Did you ever get into Pentaxes in the 80s or 90s or anything?
Oh yeah, I had a K1000 just like everybody else.
Yeah.
yeah. And in the 80s, I took it to Africa. It was like I think I had 3 lenses. I don't exactly remember what they were. I know there's a 50 and some kind of zoom, but yeah, it was easy.
So travel the world with you then, huh?
There you go. Well, I went to Africa.
That's pretty good though.
I remember what I did with it. I must have traded it at one time, but I kind of miss it. I thought I had a K1000 here. That's what I was going to grab out tonight, but I guess I can't find it or I don't.
Yeah. Marcy sold me a camera a while ago. She said she went to Africa to shoot some wildlife photos, but I want to know did you use the National Geographic binoculars camera?
No, that's been a lot of places though. Geez, did I take that someplace far away?
This?
Yeah. Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
So look at this. It's 35 millimeter film.
Yeah.
And you load 30. It's half frame, 35 millimeter. It's branded National Geographic, and it's basically plastic children's binoculars with a fixed focus lens in the middle is actually the camera. But this takes some wild. I'll go on an African safari and get some pictures of giraffes and lions with Marcy's camera.
To that. Yeah, the binoculars aren't all that wonderful though. So
no.
I have a quick question. Real recently, we got the news that Pentax is wanting to get back into the film camera manufacturing. Do you think that, well, first of all, do you think that they're going to be successful? And do you think, given that Nikon and Canon were geared more toward the professionals for, many, many years, do you think Pentax is now going to possibly have a leg up in the resurgence of analog photography?
I think it will be a cool novelty camera that some folks will buy, then it'll peter out.
I'm with Larry on that one. I reckon there'll be a footnote in history where it'll become a very big collector's item in the future. I hope I'm wrong. I hope they really take the market by storm and suddenly everyone's buying Pentaxes and so much film that the prices start to become a bit more tenable. But I can't see them doing something cheap, which means you're already starting to move into the collectors or the Leica market. Right. And then that's a very small segment of the market.
What I'm thinking it's going to wind up being is another Cosina. It'll be based on something that's already out there, like the Cosina cameras, which are very cheap to manufacture. It's just a question of what they add to it. But they do have the advantage of having Ricoh behind them, because Ricoh is not just Ricoh was never just a camera company. They were also an office products company.
Yeah.
So they have very deep pockets. They were an imaging company beyond being just cameras, and I think that could be something that helps to get the thing off the ground. But I don't understand it, because there are so many used cameras out there today selling at reasonable prices. There are people that still repair those cameras. I don't understand what they anticipate the market to be.
I wonder, several months ago we had Jess on here, and she talked about the fact that she had heard that there was a group that had taken over the intellectual property of the K1000. And she kind of dropped it at that, and we never really followed up on it. And I wonder if this is what that was, and if in fact they're going to bring back a metal bodied SLR as sort of a legacy tribute to Pentax, just sort of like the Nikon did with that last rangefinder that was.
Well, the M6 that's come back.
Yeah, because they talked about, if you watch the 7-minute video that they posted, they talked about bringing back as many of the original engineers that they could find from their heyday. So I wouldn't be surprised if y'all are wrong and they actually bring back a nice functional full manual camera that is going to be in the $2,000 range. I don't think it's going to be competing with the M6, but I don't think it's going to be one of the plastic fantastics either.
Will you guys pay $2,000 for a K1000?
No, nobody's going to pay $2,000 for a K1000.
I don't know,
but there would be a market for an M39 mount rangefinder camera, like a Cosina, a Voigtlander, that if you could buy those cameras, if you could get those on the market to retail at $500 or less, there would be a huge market for them.
I think a lot of it, really comes down to who's going to make the shutter. Because you look at all of the companies we're talking about, most of these companies did not make their own shutters. They were usually a Seiko, or they were, Copal. Yeah, Copal, Seiko, for in Japan, or in Germany, they had their own shutters too. So for Pentax to come up with a new, I'm going to backtrack here. So the Voigtlander, the M39, the Bessas, who made the shutters on those? Do we know?
They were a square shutter. So they were a Copal square shutter, but they were not metal. They were plastic blades.
Ricoh and Pentax are making shutters right now.
Are they?
For their digital cameras.
I heard rumors that the Voigtlander Cosinas, those actually used a Chinese-made shutter. That was the Phoenix camera company in Japan. I heard they made them.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. They were just the design was the Copal square, but they were not metal shutters. Most of them, I think they were all plastic blades, because they were able to make them lighter weight.
And that's okay. If you're going to make they're not going to make anything with the durability of the classic cameras we're talking about here. If they make something, they don't have to think 30, 40, 50 years in the future. They just got to make something that they can sell today. And if it's a plastic bladed shutter from China, I guess that's better than nothing. And
they don't have to fire four or five frames a second.
No,
the timing on them is the important thing, and the lightweight shutter is actually an advantage for the accuracy.
Yeah. Clearly, there's people who can make shutters. The real question, going back to Pentax's design, is of all the companies that could do it, I think they're one of them. They only recently exited the market, so it's not like a company's coming back from the dead. This isn't Yashica, which is really just some, third party that just bought the rights to the name and is going to release some garbage thing. It would be cool, but realistically, I think, Paul, you asked it, how much are we willing to spend? I love film. Believe me, I want it to live on. I want there to be new cameras, but I'm not going to spend $2,000 on a new film camera. I can't.
If you can buy a K1000 with a 50 millimeter f2 lens for $185. Why would you want to spend $500 or more dollars for the same thing on a new version of the same camera? It just doesn't make sense. They need to come up, if they come up with something unique, something that an SLR film user would get behind and jump on, like I say, a rangefinder camera. And there are plenty of M39 lenses out there, at reasonable prices. It just makes more sense to me.
There is one argument though to say that if they came up with a K1000, but with the extras what was that Russian company that went broke that was trying to bring out a new SLR? And they were going to have
I know who you're talking about. It was like an old like Ihagee design or something. They wanted to bring
exactly. But they were going to build in things like internet connections and and stuff like that. If you start adding those kind of features, you can start to say, okay, yes, you might spend a bit more on a K1000 to have with some modern features. I don't know what they would be or whether they'd be worth it.
Let's think this out though. Every time they've tried to have a digital version of a film camera, they've always put the sensor in the film plane, right? But what if you thought of it backwards? What if you had a 35 millimeter SLR, exactly how you would expect it to be, film gate, film goes in the back, normal pressure plate. You have the reflex mirror, but instead of a pentaprism, what if you put an EVF on that? And the EVF was the sensor. So in theory, you could fire the shutter, the reflex mirror would flip up, the shutter would open, exposing the film. But as right before the mirror looked up, the light's going up in the viewfinder, that's also taking your digital image.
Yeah, those kind of things you could see that would work. Wouldn't be cheap, but some people would be interested in buying that. If
I don't know if I'd spend $2,000, but that would interest me. If they found a way to where you had a camera where you could just not even choose to load film in it and fire it like a normal SLR. And instead of you wouldn't have an optical viewfinder, and that might kill some people, but you have a good EVF. Cause I have the Nikon, the Z5, and the EVF on that is fantastic. When EVFs first came out, I used to hate them. I was like, no, I want optical. But once I saw like what Fuji's done with EVFs, what Nikon's done with the EVFs, they're very, very good. Plus you can get the overlays and all that other good stuff on there. So, do something like that. And if you really want to go crazy, what was that new SLR that was going to come out that had interchangeable mounts? That never went anywhere either. They were going to do that for a while where the mount itself was a plate, and you could remove the plate and switch between screw mount, Nikon, whatever.
I remember that. It had a Kickstarter project.
Yeah, it never went anywhere. But it
never went anywhere. But
I could see if somebody wanted to come up with something new, because just to simply come up with a brand new film only camera at a premium price, there's going to be a few early adopters that might buy it up front, but it's not going to compare to the mass market. But if you had a 35 millimeter SLR that with or without film in it was also a digital camera, and you put the sensor in the prism, that I think would be cool. I think you'd have people who it could operate totally film. It could operate totally digital. Or what if every time you took a picture, you took both a film and a digital picture at the exact same time? There'd be obviously a delay, but
that would be interesting.
Now, if Pentax is actually listening, because they did say they were going to check with the community, I'd like to say, send one to Sydney. I'll test it out for you. I'm happy to carry one around for you.
Didn't you mention though that Pentax is going to listen to the show, and they're going to, they have to run everything by us, right?
Yes, exactly.
I think it would be interesting if Pentax's desire to get back into the film market would spur some interest in other camera companies to maybe think about venturing into it as well. And maybe it'd be a knock-on effect of, different technologies coming on.
Well, in order to make that happen, we all have to rush out and buy one.
We have to, right? Well, and honestly, we're not doing the innovative market a favor by continuing to buy old cameras. They have to see that people are going to be willing to buy something new. But it's a chicken and the egg kind of thing, And
I'm happy to collect a lot more old cameras, just pull them off the market. I'm happy to try that.
And not to be a downer, but look at Fuji. Fuji is a company that very much was big into film, but they were also big in other things too. And they've pretty much made it clear they don't have any interest, or they have very little interest, I should say, in the film world. So if a company like Fuji isn't investing in new cameras, and they barely are doing anything with film anymore, they make their money in other industries. You know, Ricoh made their money in other industries. So many of these companies made their money elsewhere. I hope it works. I really do, because I'd love for there to be new stuff. I'd love to know that 50 years from now, there's still going to be a market for film.
Fuji might have to backtrack on that because they've had a lot of trouble keeping up with the demand for like the X100V and some of the new cameras. They're like, I've heard they're almost a year behind on orders. So it would kind of behoove them to, I guess, focus a little more on the film market.
Well, and not only that, they shot themselves in the foot, because when they discontinued a lot of the things they did, they like destroyed it.
Yeah.
Like they went like total nuclear on some of the assembly lines or the processes for making some of their older films, that when they decided to leave the market, they like, I think Cheyenne Morrison was mentioning that he was actually in touch with somebody in Japan about wanting to buy some of the old equipment or something. And they're like, no, we destroyed it. So even if they wanted to, it's like they kind of have to reverse engineer and relearn it again.
Isn't Fuji the largest analog camera maker in the world right now?
If you include Instax.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm thinking.
But take away Instax, then they're almost nothing. The target customer for Pentax is what, like teenagers?
Teenage girls.
That's what my daughter likes.
You need to look at the tolerances they work with Instax as well. One of the big complaints about Instax is you cannot get a good Instax camera, and by that people mean, you know, a metal built or something that's sturdy or shoots well or gives you controls. It's all automated. They sort of play on the tolerances of the film as well, where it gives you that Lomo look, so to speak. So I would question, you know, them in terms of camera manufacturing in that respect. It's a great camera. It's a great thing for people to buy and use. They're super fun to use. But I mean, if you start looking at, I'll put one out here, you start looking at that, you're not going to, that doesn't even resemble a good quality camera.
There's no way in my mind that Fuji has not heard the desire for what you described, Theo, a more capable Instax. Obviously, they have the Instax wide, which each one of those exposures is pretty close to 6x9. Isn't that correct?
Yeah.
So they had essentially a medium format instant camera, and they chose to like abandon it. They know that they're selling these plastic cheap Instax cameras, and they choose not to make something better. Now, there could be a reason for it. I don't know what it is, but I just feel like they don't think it's worth it.
I'm sure their marketing department looked into it.
Right. They probably did and said, we're not going to do that.
So I actually have a theory on the Instax. I think they actually sell them as some sort of kit deals, because I've noticed I work on a military base, and they have piles of Instaxes all the time, and they mark them down to nothing and sell them, and they bring in more of them. And I think there's something where I think Fuji might sell the digital and analog cameras as some sort of package where you have to buy a little bit of both, because I've seen so many of those things just pile up, sold for nothing, and then more of them come in to replace them within like a week. And I find I've seen it several places, and I don't get it. I assume there has to be some sort of marketing mechanism behind it, but that's a shot in the dark.
I work with an Alzheimer's nonprofit, and we use them for guided reminiscence. I'll bring an Instax camera to an assisted living and make 20, 30 pictures and hand them around, and we get lots of stories, because when the folks can hold a photo in their hand, it brings back these memories from when they hold photos in their hands.
All right, we've covered quite a bit of Pentax. We went off into some fantasy world of new cameras, Fuji Instax. Anthony, did you want to do a lightning round?
Well, I'm just curious. We've crossed over into the new year, and Paul had talked about resolutions, but I'm wondering if there's if people are starting the new year with a new camera. And if so, what are they shooting, and what have they picked up recently?
Oh, Larry's got something.
This is my first like-ish camera. It's a Fed 3.
Those are nice.
Yeah, it seems to work. I haven't put a roll of film through it yet, but it's a little stiff and old, like me. And it seems to work. And then the first roll of film is going in it tomorrow. And my resolution is to collect less and shoot more.
It's a good resolution.
I've got one. As you know, gas is a very transmissible disease. So on the recording of the last podcast, I picked up an STD. So this is the Visca-wide 16 STD. It's got a swing lens on it. I think this is around 1961. Looking forward to running some film through it. The one thing I well, two things I don't like is one is that the shutter release is tiny, and I'm afraid I'm going to drop this thing and break it. And secondly, it's very easy to hit the frame reset button on the top. But I'm looking forward to using this guy.
That's 16 millimeter, right?
Yeah.
Is it perforated or unperforated?
You can use both, actually. It has their branded cartridges that came with it, and you can use either perforated or unperforated 16 millimeter
cool.
film.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
Well, when you finally get some images from that, Mark, I'm definitely going to want to see that.
Yeah, we'll do.
Yeah. So just in case anybody's curious, on the Zoom call, Larry is directly below Mark and Paul is to his left. So they're the ones closest to the guy with the STD. So you guys better be careful. That's hilarious. Cool. That's a nice gas.
I managed to get a few things over the break as well. I was lucky. I got Kex meter.
Nice.
This is my first one of those meters that you sort of put into a cold shoe or hot shoe.
Yeah.
It's really a lot smaller than I thought it was going to be. They don't do themselves justice on the advertising. I got a Lumix, of course there has to be a digicam here, a Lumix LX3, and that's the one where you have the widescreen on the back, but this came with a filter kit as well. So it's got a circular polarizer on it at the moment, but the whole thing, it's amazing what they did with the filter kit on these, because it's actually like this big cone that you like half a toilet roll that you actually screw on to the front, and so that's pretty cool. But keeping in theme with the show, and someone called this probably the digital version of 110. I don't know if you can see this, but it's a Ricoh RDC7, and it looks like a 110 camera until you flip up the screen, and suddenly it looks like a little mini computer. So, which is really bizarre. I haven't shot with this one yet. I have to get a new battery charger for it. But that's
it looks like it plays DVDs.
It does, doesn't it? It looks like one of those portable DVD players, but in miniature. Yeah, keeping in sense of the Pentax show, and it's Ricoh is very much related with Pentax. I thought I'd sort of bring that one up.
Hey Theo, that LX3 is very beautiful. A long time ago I had an LX3, and it was the first camera that I actually loved. I wished I still had it, but I got some really good, in my opinion, pretty good images. Not because of skill or anything, but just the image quality. I just loved that camera, and I love the fact that you can switch the aspect ratio right on the lens.
Interesting enough, my first playing around with it is fantastic. The reason I actually got it was because I picked up a Leica Deluxe 3 a few months ago, and unfortunately the sensor went on that one. It's doing some really weird stuff on the sensor. There's lines coming across and all sorts of stuff. And I believe the LX3 and the Deluxe 3 were actually made together. So I thought, well, this time I might go for the Panasonic version of it, because maybe they have some magic sauce in there, which makes them last a bit longer. And it is fantastic. I love it. I just love the aspect 16:9 aspect ratio on it. That's what's really hooked me in. And I took it out the other day with my Mamiya 7 with the panoramic kit in it. So I just spent the whole day shooting pano type photos.
Well, it has is it a
Summilux?
No, not Summilux.
It's a Summilux,
lens, yeah.
So that surprised me too.
I bought mine new, and it has traveled the world with me several times around. That was my throw it in the bag, take it out into the coffee fields, take it onto the farms, throw it in the back, and go out on the boat. That camera has been quite a workhorse for me.
Yeah, the LX cameras are just fantastic, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I've got the LX3 and the LX5 and love them both. Theo, is there a model number on that filter attachment for the LX3? Because I'd like to pick one up if I could.
Yeah, it's the it's called the lens adapter. It's the DMW-LA4.
LA4.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And then you pick up the Lumix PL filter. Oh, this is the polarizer filter. They're 46 millimeter filters, and they're DMW LPL 46 for the filter, which is an interesting effect. I've never put a polarizer on a little digicam before, and it's an interesting effect when you start rotating it.
Very cool. Thank you.
Ed, any new gas? Anything new?
Trying to control myself, and this all does not help.
Yeah.
But hey, no, my resolution for this year is to stop being such a perfectionist and carry my camera more, film camera that is, and just shoot more. like take advantage of opportunities all the time to just shoot. So there you go.
That's a good resolution. Andrew.
So I'm going to try and sell some cameras. I don't have a massive collection, but I have too many. And I've said that many times, but I'm pretty sure I'm actually going to do it. But I saying that, I bought, I don't know if I showed you guys this.
The Brumburger.
It's technically branded as a Brumburger, but it's a Neoka S2. And of course, when I bought it, I quickly realized there's another Brumburger that's actually a Royal 35P, I think. And I ordered one of those too. So that's getting here in a few days.
It's a Royal. I have the box for that camera.
Oh, you got the box.
I mean, I have the camera too, but I have a boxed case, everything,
Nice.
the Brumburger. It's a Neoka too. They're actually pretty good. I mean, it's a simple camera. It's a basic camera.
I really liked it because I wanted something a little simpler. I kind of like the rangefinder style. And I like the fact it focuses very close.
Yeah.
That's one of my complaints with rangefinders is most of them have like a 3 to 5 foot minimum focus. And on this, it's like 1.7 feet. And I've never seen another one that focuses that close. And I kind of like the dual strike film advance. It's kind of a neat thing.
The Kodak Signet 35 is a rangefinder, and I'm pretty sure it goes down to 2 feet. So not quite 1.7, but that's a good one for slightly closer focus. But that's cool.
That's it from
Marcy. Anything new? Any new reviews you got planned?
Oh, I always have like 27 drafts, in the background. But I have mostly, I don't buy cameras really anymore, or rarely do I. And people give me stuff all the time. And so when I'm thinking about what am I doing, I got right around me, I have every camera that I'm looking at right now, someone has given to me. And recently I had a friend pass away, and before he died, he wanted me to come and get his camera collection. And I was thinking, he has great stuff, really. But, some of it's like beyond what my $12 limit. And so I went and I got it, and I'm like, what am I going to do with all this stuff? So I have cameras since we were redoing things in the house. I have cameras that are in boxes put away, and that's not right. That's just wrong. It's like chaining your dog up or something. Don't do it. So I'm going to change my studio now that I don't have people coming in. Now that I'm retired, I don't have people coming in. And I'm going to put shelves all over like you guys have. And I'm going to put the cameras on there because I'm watching Andrew talk about one camera, and Mike runs over and grabs it. He knew where it was. It wasn't in a box upstairs in the back, that kind of thing. So one of the reasons I'm here is to look at your backgrounds and try to figure out what kind of shelf I'm putting up. So it's not anything about getting any, buying cameras, but, so who has the best shelving? What do you think?
Well, the best display I've ever seen is Vlad Kern's USSR photo. His display is fantastic, and he used IKEA shelves. Mine, I can't move my laptop enough to really show you, but that's all 2x6s that I got from Home Depot.
Right.
I did 3 deep, so it's really 15.5 inches front to back. I have 4x4s in the middle and on the ends for weight. So this thing is so sturdy, and I screwed everything together. So I 100% made it myself, and I have LED lights that run. They're just not on right now. So I found that building my own shelves, if you have the time and ability to do it, is definitely the best way to go, because then you can make it exactly how you want. Mark, yours are custom built too, right?
Right. Yeah. I designed, drew it up in AutoCAD or something and sent it over to the guy to build. And it's 2 sets of shelving actually. So I've got probably 15 linear feet, and then I have a corner closet in the back for tripods and stuff like that.
How deep are your shelves?
It runs about I think it's 18 or 19 inches deep.
Okay.
Yeah, and then down at the bottom, I have them build squares I could fit the 12x12 sort of packing crates into for accessories and stuff like that.
Okay. Right.
Yeah, with mine being 15.5 inches deep, I can fit comfortably 4 SLRs with lenses in front of one another. Rangefinders, I can fit up to 6 front to back, depending on how deep I want to go. So you could fit quite a bit in there. But I know some people do it and they'll say they don't have any problems, but cameras get to be so heavy. I'm so nervous of people who have glass shelves. I would worry about that because of the weight some of these things have. I have no idea how much the shelf could possibly weigh, but it's anchored to the floor. I anchored it to the wall because I have small kids. They're not going to likely climb up it. But if this thing were to collapse, it'd kill somebody with all the weight. Yeah.
I'm going to attach mine all to the wall and build it.
Yeah, that's what I did too.
I hadn't thought of going that far deep. It's just, more area you got to dig out and clean out too.
I've got the IQ ones in mind. They're not as deep, but like Mike said, I've anchored it to the wall because
you got to.
I don't think these
the glass front too, right?
Yeah, I bought the glass front for it as well, and that's really good because I've barely had to dust my cameras or anything like that. It really
I barely
keeps the
dust my camera.
But I haven't sort of had the need for it either. So and it's really good in terms of leaving the cameras with the lens caps off as well, because that's the one thing I'd start to worry about is if I didn't have the glass in front of them. But I mean the drawback on these is they're not very deep. They're the standard, I think they're called Billy bookcases.
Yep. That's what Vlad uses too.
Yeah. And I have inserted the glass shelves in between the normal shelves, but I do limit how much I put on the glass shelves as well. Mainly because if I put too many solid shelves in there, it really limits you putting a second camera behind one behind the other because you can't see it.
Okay.
So the glass just lets a bit more light through.
If you get the Billy, for anybody listening, if you ever want to get the Billy shelves from IKEA, they do work really well. Like Theo said, they're not super deep, but they are good for cameras, but they don't include the doors. You have to buy that separately.
Yeah.
And IKEA sells it as Morliden, I think is what it's called. They make them specifically to mount with the hinges and the door for it. So that's, I had that written down somewhere.
On the plus side, it's very easy to attach.
Yeah, a lot easier than building it from scratch.
Yeah. And the trick with these two is you can't see it now. I can't really move my camera, but on top, you can buy attachment, which gives you another two shelves higher as well. And it just literally sits on top of those.
I don't have any real guests. I've got nothing new, but I want to give a shout out. Just a couple days ago, I was in Grand Rapids, Michigan. On episode 25 of the Camerosity podcast, we had Steve Sasson on talking about the first digital camera. And one of the guests on that show was Daniel Coons. Daniel was the guy who built the replica of Steve's original camera. So I went to visit him at his store in Grand Rapids, and I got to hold his replica of the Steve Sasson's original camera. And Daniel opened it up for me. Like he unscrewed the top and folded out. And I have some pictures that I'll post in the group to share. And it is mind blowing, the level of detail that he did. And he told me that when he had Steve see his replica, he was opening it up and was like, just blown away, like at how accurate this thing is. I mean, so while I can't say I held the original, I mean, this is as close as you could possibly be to the original camera, so I could say I held like a piece of history. But in addition to that, Daniel is a huge fan, Robot Theo, of early digicams. So he does have some film cameras too, but he probably has more digicams than he does film cameras, and he's got them organized by year. Like he's got a whole area of digicam, like video floppy cameras from like 1988, 1989. He's got several of the Kodak DCS, the digital camera science, I think is what that stood for. Those early Nikon and Canon SLR hybrid digital cameras. He's got an early Kodak dental camera, a digital camera that was made for dentists. It's mind blowing. Like just that whole segment of the pioneering from like mid 80s up to about 2000. He just had a huge display. It was super, super cool. So Daniel, I don't know if you're going to listen to this episode, but super awesome to meet you. If you guys are ever in Grand Rapids, Michigan area, he works at Norman Camera. So stop by there and pick up a pack of film or something from him and support a small camera shop. Paul, anything new?
No, nothing really. I got a cool lens and that was it. A 1935 Lights, New York, 90 millimeter Wallensack lens. Back in the mid 40s, not 35. The mid 40s, Leica couldn't supply some of the lenses that they needed for the cameras, so Wallensack made them, and Lights New York sold them.
Lights New York. That's what I was going to say.
Nothing too cool.
And then I think we're coming back to Anthony.
Looking back, the end of 2022 was just really difficult for me at work, and I just kind of stopped shooting. And so I've been going back and revisiting some of the cameras that I picked up towards the end of the year last year. So I just spent a week with the Canon VT Deluxe with the little bottom winder. Really, really enjoyed shooting that. The Acurel and then the the KW Pilot, trying to figure that little critter out. I was sort of, I was using, I found some Verichrome pan from 1974 in 127 format on eBay for around $6 a roll, which I thought was pretty good.
That's really good.
And it's held up pretty well. But like you, this is a half frame 127 collapsible TLR from what, 1931 maybe,
early 30s. Yeah.
And it had this really wonderful swing out brass film advance lever with an automated counter. I was trying to figure out how to, because if you pull it 2 full clicks, it overshoots the numbers and goes into the next number. And so I thought, well, I'll be really tricky and it kind of would go ping when it hit the number would line up direct. And I thought, oh, that's got to be the right frame count. And instead, exactly half of the film overlaps by about 1/5 of each frame.
Yeah, I had problems advancing the film on that one too.
And then once it got past frame like 8, it had 2 full clicks or 2 full pulls would advance at exactly 1 number, and I had no framing issues. So I guess I just gotta guess on those others and maybe do like 1 3/4 or 1 and just do 2 pulls and burn some film with bad spacing.
They didn't make the 16 numbers on 127. I think for a very short while they started to. I think one of the Japanese companies did that, but it wasn't common.
So you just have to guess. It's just sort of a trust me. But what a cool, odd camera. Yeah. I mean, I'm really happy that Mr. Novak sent that to me to try. Because I can't imagine ever getting another chance to shoot this camera. Especially once I saw what they're selling for on eBay as a true collector's item. But what a 127 half frame TLR. And then going forward, it's funny because we have a private chat for the hosts, and Paul's always going on about never another Barnack I'll never get another Barnack. Oh wait, I just got a box with 3 Fs in the mail today. And so I'm quietly stalking a 3F myself because I've never had a Barnack Leica. I've got lots of clones. I've got the Leotax and I've got the Canon and I've got my Russian copies, but I've never had an actual Leica Barnack. I'll find out this week if I'm going to be successful at acquiring a very nice set with a 3F.
Well, good luck to you there.
Thanks.
Paul, our next episode, who are we going to have on?
Yeah. Brandon Monroe is going to join us. Brandon is a young guy who has spent the last couple of years learning how to repair Contax 2, 2A, 3, and 3A cameras. And he's going to join us and run us through some where he gathered this information, because he went to the old guys. And some of them were very willing to share information, others not quite so much. But he actually went so far as to buy a Contax camera that was overhauled by, I want to say, I'm not going to mention his name, but by the premier Contax repairman in the U.S. He bought a camera that he had recently repaired just so he could see how he did it. He will be joining us, and he has 4 of my cameras right now. Yeah, 2 are complete and 2 are still on the bench, but that's going to be fun. He'll be a lot of fun to have.
I'm super excited. I like talking about Contaxes. I've spoken many times about my one. I know he's not touching those 2, but to have another option as somebody who can touch the 2s and 3s. Very cool. So we'll look forward to that in episode 41. I'm putting together, we have some ideas for episode 42 to get some pretty interesting guests on and talk about cameras that don't get a lot of love too often here. But as always, the topics and discussions on the Camerosity podcast are determined by you, the listeners. While we sometimes go into a show with an idea what we want to talk about, as you guys have listened, for those of you who've listened to multiple episodes, that can change quickly and unexpectedly, which is, I think, the greatest thing about this show. So just wanted to say thank you, everybody, for an awesome 2022. This is a good start to this year. I appreciate all the first-time callers. Ed, it was great to meet you. Marcy, I know you've been trying to come on the show a couple times, so it's super awesome to actually see you and hear your voice. We've corresponded through Facebook for quite a while. Andrew, Mark, Mario, it's always awesome for you guys to be on. Larry, you too. We lost Robert. We lost some of the other people who joined shortly on. So thank you to those guys for for joining us. Does anybody else have anything else they want to say before we go?
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
If it seems really bright here, and my wife has a grow operation going here.
Oh.
I saw that online, mate. You know, should you be putting that online, or are you going to have like the the drug police knocking your door down?
It's all herbs and spices.
Well, spices. Yeah.
No wacky tobacco?
No, not so far.
No special herbs and spices. Is that what you say?